The sky was a clear blue without a cloud in sight, and the air in the suburbs of Fairfax, Virginia, was cool, like a promise of a peaceful day. I stood on the porch of our Willow Creek home, holding a steaming cup of coffee, my flip-flops still carrying a bit of grass from the front yard. Everything felt so ordinary, it was almost boring until it happened. A white SUV glided by, the HOA logo plastered on the door, and then a guy stepped out, wearing a black polo, sporting mirrored sunglasses, and holding a taser like he had just walked off the set of a B-movie action flick. He shouted something about violating regulations and pointed directly at Sarah, my wife, who was standing less than 10 feet away from me on the walkway leading to our home. Sarah, with her brown hair pulled up in an old T-shirt from her days at Fort Bragg, shot him a glance, one of those looks I knew meant she was sizing up the situation. I was about to say something like, "Hey, take it easy, what's going on?" But before I could get the words out, the guy pulled the trigger. A bolt of bright blue electricity zipped through the air. The taser dart fly like an arrow, and Sarah collapsed right in front of me like a sack of potatoes someone had kicked over. My coffee cup slipped from my hand, shattering on the wooden floor, the sound of the breaking ceramic drowning out the pounding of my heart in my chest. I stood frozen, my brain seemingly shutting down. Just a second ago, we were arguing about whether to buy more charcoal for barbecue this weekend, and now she was lying there, motionless on the stone walkway. The HOA employee, with a badge reading Willow Creek Community Patrol peeking out from his chest, was shouting into his radio. "Target has been subdued, requesting backup." Did he think he was on the battlefield in Iraq or something, instead of this neighborhood with its white picket fences and neatly trimmed lawns? I wanted to rush over, wanted to scream, but my feet felt like they were nailed to the floor. But then, amidst the panic, I noticed something strange. Sarah wasn't groaning, wasn't convulsing like someone who'd just been tossed. She lay there, silent, too silent, and as I looked closer, I saw the corners of her mouth subtly lift into a small, discreet smile, the kind she often wore when she knew she had the upper hand. Before I could wrap my head around what was happening, something else caught my eye. Small, sharp red dots flickering on the chest of the HOA guy. Not just one, but 3. 4 red laser dots, moving slowly like predatory spiders, aiming straight at him from the shadowy corners of the bushes beside the house, the garage roof, even from the second-floor window of the neighbor's house. He saw it too. He stopped shouting, his hand gripping the radio trembling, sunglasses sliding down his nose to reveal his panicked eyes. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, his voice trailing off. I heard the faint rustle of leaves, and then from the darkness, figures emerged quietly, unhurried, calm like ghosts. I counted 3, maybe 4, dressed in dark clothing, no badges, no logos, but the way they moved, the way they held their weapons, told me they weren't civilians. These were people who had lived through the fire, who had walked the battlefield. And I knew right away who they were. Sarah's old teammates from Delta Force, the special unit she had served with at Fort Bragg. Sarah opened her eyes, slowly sitting up as if she had just woken from a short nap. She brushed the dust off her jeans, removed the taser cord from her shirt like it was just an extra thread, then looked up at the HOA guy. "You need to practice your aim," she said, her voice steady but as cold as steel. "Your shot went low and to the left." The guy's mouth dropped open, his arms hanging limply, the taser clattering to the ground. He wasn't the only one shocked, I was too. But while I was still trying to piece everything together in my head, Sarah stood tall, her gaze sweeping over the crowd hiding nearby, giving a slight nod as if signaling. Back then, when we had just gotten married, Sarah used to talk about her days in Delta Force, the missions that were never documented, the times she faced death without batting an eye. I thought those were just stories to share by the fireplace, but now, standing in the middle of Willow Creek, I realized everything was real. She wasn't just a former special ops. She was a finely honed machine designed to survive and conquer, even when the enemy was just some guy in a black polo with a cheap taser. "You just shot a federal asset," Sarah continued, stepping closer to the guy, her voice soft but sharp as a knife. "Do you even realize how many laws you just broke? Or do you think that little fabric badge gives you the right to play cop for real?" The guy stepped back, sweat pouring down his forehead, but he couldn't find the words. He glanced around. maybe hoping the backup on the radio would come to his rescue, but there was no one. Just the sound of the wind rustling through the oak trees and the cold stares of those lurking in the shadows. I finally found my voice again. "Sarah, are you okay?" I asked, stepping closer to her, my hand still shaking from the initial shock. She turned around, giving a small smile, not a comforting smile, but the kind of smile someone gives after making a perfect move on a chessboard. "You really think a zap from that toy could take me down, Mike?" she replied, then gently patted my shoulder. "Don't worry. Everything is going just as it should. Am I heading in the right direction?" I wanted to ask again, but before I could open my mouth, one of the shadowy figures stepped out from the tall bushes, wearing a black coat and holding a rifle with a laser sight. He didn't say a word, just gave Sarah a brief nod. I recognized him as Jake, an old friend of hers from Fort Bragg, who had come over for dinner a few times. But now he wasn't the Jake from the dinner table jokes. He was part of something bigger, something I didn't fully grasp yet. The HOA employee finally managed to stammer out a few words. "You can't do this. This is private property. I have rights." He hadn't finished his sentence when Sarah interrupted. "Your rights stop at not attacking others, especially when you don't even know who you're up against." She stepped closer, just inches away from him, and I saw him shrink back. "You think this is a game, but you just kicked off something you can't stop." That's when I felt the heartbeat of this story shift. From a peaceful morning in Fairfax, it had transformed into a battle, not one fought with guns, but with the strategy and patience that only Sarah possessed. The red laser dot still danced on that guy's chest, like a warning for force he couldn't fully comprehend. And there I was, standing on the porch, knowing that this was just the beginning. After that crazy morning, when Sarah calmly stood up from the taser hit, as if she had just walked out of gym, I was still standing there, dumbfounded on the porch, trying to piece together the fragments in my mind. The coffee cup shattered beneath my feet, the rich aroma of Robusta mingling with the damp air of Fairfax, Virginia. Now just a distant memory. Sarah patted my shoulder and said, "Don't worry, Mike. This isn't over yet," then walked into the house like nothing was amiss. But I knew, deep down, that this Willow Creek neighborhood was far from the glossy brochure the realtor had handed us 6 months ago. We moved here on a crisp autumn day, with vibrant red oak leaves falling all over the streets and the wind rustling to the white picket fences, creating a pleasant sound. Willow Creek is located on the outskirts of Fairfax, about 20 miles from downtown Washington, D.C., just close enough for me to commute to my job at the law office, yet far enough to escape the city's hustle and bustle. The promotional flyer promised a place that was peaceful, safe, and family-friendly, sweet words like candy that made Sarah and me think this would be the perfect spot to start fresh after her years of struggle at Fort Bragg. But now, looking back, I realize those words were just a shiny coat of paint hiding a strange truth. This neighborhood is ruled by a force called the HOA, and it's nothing like we imagined. Our house is a typical 2-story colonial, with white walls and a gray roof. The front yard is about 30 square feet, featuring lush green grass that I have to mow every week to avoid the prying eyes of the neighbors. Every house in Willow Creek looks exactly the same, from the paint color to the size of the windows, as if someone copied a design and plastered it all over the neighborhood. At first, I found this rather pleasant. The uniformity created a sense of order. But then I realized that this order wasn't natural. It was imposed, monitored by the invisible eyes of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, a group I once thought only organized Christmas parties or reminded everyone to shovel their sidewalks. I was wrong. Sarah was the first to notice the oddities of this place. On the third day after moving in, she drove her Ford F-150 Raptor, a beast of a truck in matte black that she loved more than me, I swear, and parked it in the driveway. The front wheels crossed an invisible line between the concrete and the grass by about 2 inches, no more. The next morning, while I was brewing coffee in the kitchen, Sarah walked in, holding a yellow piece of paper with violation notice printed in bold. "They say your truck is disrupting the aesthetic of the neighborhood," she read aloud, her tone half surprised, half amused. I glanced out the window. The Raptor looked powerful and solid, but there was nothing disruptive about it. I burst out laughing, thinking it was just a joke. But Sarah wasn't laughing. She folded the paper, stuffed in a drawer, and said, "They're serious, Mike. Very serious." From then on, the signs began to emerge small at first, but increasingly frequent, like raindrops before a storm. One afternoon, I saw old Mrs. Mary from the house 2 lots down being measured for the height of her grass by a guy in a black polo shirt, sporting an HOA badge, using a tape measure just like the one you'd buy at Home Depot for $5. He scribbled something on a clipboard and then handed her a citation for having grass taller than 3 inches over the limit. Mary, with her silver hair and a hobbled gait, just stood there, mumbling apologies as if she had committed some terrible crime. I told Sarah about it, thinking she would find it funny, but she just frowned, looked out the window, and said, "They're not joking. This is a system." The system quickly became clearer. One Tuesday evening, I forgot to roll the trash can out to the curb before 7 a.m. 10 minutes late, because I had to rush my neighbor's dog to the emergency vet after it swallowed a chicken bone. When I got back, the trash can was still sitting quietly in the garage, but a $50 ticket was stuck to my front door for failure to comply with the trash collection schedule. I was so mad I wanted to rip the ticket apart, but Sarah just glanced at it, shrugged, and added it to the drawer she started calling the crazy files of Willow Creek. "They love playing by the rules," she said, her tone light but with an edge beneath it. "Let's see how long they can keep it up." The Raptor was once again the center of trouble. A week after the first citation, a woman claiming to be Helen Voss, the HOA president, knocked on our door. She wore a pale pink sweater, holding a clipboard like a sword, standing tall as if addressing Congress. "I'm Helen," she said, her voice sweet yet commanding. "That truck of yours, it doesn't align with the spirit of our community. We need harmony, you understand?" I nodded, about to explain that it was just a personal vehicle, but Sarah stepped out from the living room, wiping machine oil from the car repair earlier that morning. "Harmony, huh?" she asked, her tone flat. "I see it parked just fine in my garage. What's the problem?" Helen stiffened, her smile freezing like ice. "It has too much of a military style," she replied, her voice beginning to tremble. "This community doesn't accept things that feel aggressive." Sarah looked at her, then at the Raptor, and back at her again. "I drove it through the desert in Iraq," she said, as if she were talking about the weather. "If you think it's aggressive, then you haven't seen me drive it." Helen took a step back, her mouth moving but no words came out. She turned away, clipboard pressed tightly against her chest, and I knew right then that we had just been blacklisted. From then on, everything escalated. The HOA started sending weekly notices, sometimes about the Raptor, other times about the rocking chair I left outside for more than 24 hours. Once, they even fined us for the porch light exceeding 800 lumens, even though I swear that bulb was only 60 watts. Sarah didn't get angry, didn't yell like I wanted to. She just quietly collected each piece of paper, every notice, and tucked them away in a drawer with a subtle smile. "They think they're in control," she told me one evening as we sat on the couch, the soft glow from the TV casting shadows around us. "But they have no idea who they're up against." I started to feel suffocated. Willow Creek wasn't the peaceful paradise it was advertised to be. It felt more like a disguised prison, where every step was monitored and every mistake was punished. But Sarah, she wasn't fazed at all. She viewed this neighborhood as a battleground, not one filled with guns and bullets, but with ridiculous rules and self-appointed enforcers. And I knew, from the way she calmly faced Helen and that guy with the taser this morning, that she was ready for a fight that the HOA would never see coming. As I picked up the shards of the coffee cup on the porch after the taser incident, I looked at Sarah standing in the yard, her gaze sweeping over the rows of oak trees and the identical rooftops. "What are you thinking?" I asked. She turned back, the smirk on her lips now more pronounced. "You'll see," she said. "This is just the beginning." After that morning when Sarah got tasered right on our walkway, Willow Creek no longer felt like the peaceful neighborhood I once knew. I stood on the porch, staring at the remnants of the coffee cup that had been swept away, but the unsettling feeling clung to me like the early morning chill in Fairfax, Virginia. Sarah was different. She walked into the house after the HOA guy ran off, still clutching the taser like a trophy, and then disappeared down to the basement without saying another word. I wanted to ask her what she was thinking, wanted to know what those red laser dots from her Delta Force team meant. But I didn't, With Sarah, sometimes silence is the only way to understand her. That night, as the dim streetlights filtered through the window, I sat on the sofa with a cold Budweiser in hand, trying to push away the image of Sarah falling. The TV buzzed somewhere in the background about a football game, but I wasn't really paying attention. Sarah came up from the basement, her hands wiped clean of engine oil, and sat down beside me. "Are you okay, Mike?" she asked, her voice soft yet sharp, as if she could see right through my chaotic mind. I nodded, but then I couldn't hold back. "You knew he would do that, didn't you? The whole Taser thing, you let it happen." She looked at me, her brown eyes sparkling with a mischievous glint I hadn't seen since we left Fort Bragg. "Not exactly," she replied, shrugging. "I knew they'd do something stupid, but I didn't expect them to be dumb enough to use a Taser in broad daylight. Anyway, it works out for my plan." "A plan?" I furrowed my brow, but before I could ask, she got up, walked into the kitchen, and returned with a thick stack of files that she dropped onto the table. "Here," she said, giving it a light pat. "If they want to play by the rules, then I'll play by my own." I opened the file, so surprised that I nearly spilled my beer. Inside were stacks of documents, violation notices from the HOA, screenshot of emails between Helen Voss and the board members, even a copy of the meeting minutes that I had no idea where she got. One paper had the exact date and time that the HOA guy measured Mrs. Mary's lawn, along with a photo taken from our window. "When did you start doing this?" I asked, my voice trailing off. Sarah sat down, crossed her arms, and smiled a smile of someone who had just set a trap without the prey knowing. "Since the first day they find the raptor," she replied. "I don't like being passive, Mike. You know that." "I know. Sarah isn't the type to just sit back and take it." Back at Fort Bragg, she once told me about the time she and the Delta Force team got ambushed in Afghanistan. No guns, no ammo, just a knife and her calmness that got the whole team out alive. "Every second was a move," she said back then, and I believed her. Now, here in Willow Creek, I see that strategic mind of hers kicking back into gear, not with weapons, but with paperwork, evidence, and a patience that only she possesses. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened street of the neighborhood. "They think they're in charge," she said, her voice dropping. "They patrol, find people, threaten everyone as if this is a prison. But they don't know that I face far more dangerous people than that guy with a taser 100 times over." I watched her, feeling the strength hidden behind her petite frame. The Raptor parked in the garage, its lights reflecting off the matte black paint, stood as a symbol of the challenge she brought to this neighborhood. "What about Jake and the others?" I asked, recalling the figures with the red laser dots. "What's their connection?" Sarah turned back, her expression now more serious. "They're old friends, Mike. Delta Force isn't just a team, it's family. When I told Jake about this HOA mess, he just laughed and said, 'Let me see how dumb they really are.' Today was the first time they showed up, but it won't be the last." I swallowed hard, feeling both astonished and anxious. "You mean they're gonna come back?" She nodded, "Only if needed. Right now, I'm just observing." I stood up and walked closer to her. "Observe? Sarah, they just tossed you. This isn't a joke." She placed her hand on my shoulder, a light but firm touch. "Mike, I've been shot at from 500 yards away in the dark. A guy with a cheap taser doesn't scare me. But you're right, it's not a joke. It's a battle, and I'm going to win." That phrase echoed in my mind all night. When Sarah returned to the basement, I heard her open the safe I thought only held house documents. But now I wasn't so sure. Maybe inside was something bigger, something she had been preparing for a long time. I sat back on the sofa, the can of beer now warm in my hand, and realized that Willow Creek was not just our new home, it was Sarah's new battlefield. The morning after the taser incident, I woke up to the scent of coffee wafting from the kitchen, not the kind I usually make, but the strong brew Sarah likes, the stuff she calls battle fuel from her days at Fort Bragg. I walked down the stairs and saw her sitting at the dining table, a stack of files from last night, now thicker with a few new sheets of paper. The early sunlight streamed to the window, highlighting her high ponytail and her sharp, knife-like eyes. I pulled out a chair across from her, still cradling my throbbing head from a restless sleep. "You're up early," I asked, my voice rough. Sarah slid a cup of coffee toward me, a faint smile on her lips. War doesn't wait for anyone to sleep in, Mike. I took a sip, the bitter taste jolting me awake. War? Are you serious? With those flower folks? Sarah nodded, flipping a page in the file. Do you think yesterday was just a coincidence? That guy didn't just happen to be patrolling with a taser. They're trained, they're organized. Helen Voss and her cronies are building a control system in Willow Creek, and I won't let them keep going. I looked at her, feeling like I was talking to a general rather than my wife. But that Sarah's someone who had survived missions that others only dare to dream about, and now she was bringing that strategic mind to the suburban neighborhood. She stood up and walked to the corner of the room to grab a small box from the cupboard. When she opened it, I saw that it wasn't papers inside, but equipment. A tiny microphone, a few wires, and something that looked like a mini transmitter. What is this? I asked, my voice trailing off. Sarah set it down on the table and began piecing the parts together like assembling a gun. A tool, she replied tersely. I placed it in the bushes near Mrs. Mary's house last week. It recorded everything that the guy mowing the lawn said over the radio, his name, rank, even orders from Helen. She called me a threat that needs to be eliminated. I gasped, unable to believe it. Eliminated? What are they planning to do? Hire a hitman? Sarah scoffed. No way. They just want to be scared. But they picked the wrong person. I watched her assemble the equipment, her fingers moving swiftly as if she had never left Delta Force. What about the basement? I asked, recalling the sound of the safe last night. Sarah paused, looked at me for a second, then stood up. Follow me, she said, leading me down the old wooden stairs. Our basement used to be a storage space filled with junk old paint cans, a few broken chairs, a bicycle I had never used. But when Sarah turned on the light, I saw it had transformed into something entirely different. A clear corner of the wall, a map of Willow Creek hanging with red markers, a small table piled high with papers, and an old laptop running what looked like encryption software. Oh my God, Sarah, I exclaimed, stepping closer to the map. What is this? A war room. She crossed her arms, leaning against the wall, her tone calm. You could call it command center. I've been keeping tabs on them since they punished the Raptor for the second time. Every patrol, every announcement, every time they threaten the neighbors, it's all right here. She pointed to a thick stack of papers on the table. Mrs. Mary sent me pictures of them punishing her. Jim down the street recorded them when they threatened to tear down a garage because of that Mustang. They have no idea I've turned the whole neighborhood into my eyes and ears. I turned back to look at her, feeling both proud and scared. So, what are you planning to do with all this? Sarah stepped up to the table, opened her laptop, and typed a few keys. The screen lit up with a video from the security camera showing the guy with the taser from yesterday standing in front of our house, speaking through a walkie-talkie. The target needs a strong warning. Voss said to just do it. She turned off the video and looked at me. I'm going to use it to take them down, Mike. Not with fists, but with the truth. But I need time, and I need them to dig their own grave deeper. The tension inside me rose with each passing second. What about Jake and his team? What will they do? Sarah shrugged, but her eyes lit up. They're our backup. Jake lives 5 miles away in Reston. He and a few others are watching from a distance. If the HOA crosses a line like they did yesterday, they'll step in. But right now, I want to handle this myself. I shook my head, unsure what to say. Sarah, this is a neighborhood, not a battlefield. She stepped closer, placing her hand on my shoulder. To me, anywhere can be a battlefield if someone wants to control me. Do you understand? I nodded, even though my mind was still a whirlwind. Sarah turned back to the table, grabbing a small USB drive from her laptop. This is the first step, she said, holding it up. Everything I've gathered, emails, videos, audio. I sent a copy to Jake last night. If I need to, he'll pass it on to the right people in D.C. I frowned. You mean the FBI? She smiled. This time it was a genuine smile. Maybe, but not yet. I want Helen and her cronies to shoot themselves in the foot first. as we stepped up from the basement. I could feel the rhythm of this battle shift. Sarah wasn't just strong. She was a storm waiting to break free. I watched her standing by the window, her gaze sweeping over Willow Creek, and I knew she wasn't just protecting this house, but the whole neighborhood. "They're not ready," she murmured, almost to herself. I didn't ask more, but deep down, I believed her. After Sarah led me down to the basement and showed me her command center with maps, a laptop, and thick files, I began to see Willow Creek in a whole new light. The suburban neighborhood in Fairfax, Virginia was no longer the place where I dreamed of peaceful evenings on the porch with Sarah. It now resembled a chessboard, and Sarah was playing a game that I was just starting to grasp the rules of. That morning, as she stood by the window with a sharp gaze, muttering, "They're not ready," I could feel the storm brewing, but I had no idea that the day she referred to, those HOA folks, were crazier than I could have ever imagined. Everything became clearer on a Saturday afternoon, about 2 weeks after the Taser incident. I was mowing the front lawn, the mower sputtering away, sweat dripping down my forehead, even though it was only around 65 degrees. Sarah was in the garage, tinkering with the Raptor as usual, the sound of wrenches clinking against metal ringing out steadily. I glanced across the street and saw Mrs. Mary standing in front of her house, clutching a vibrant red tulip pot, her face pale. Then I heard footsteps not the usual kind, but heavy and synchronized like a small army. 3 guys in black polo shirts, cargo pants, and badges reading Willow Creek Community Patrol emerged from around the corner, holding clipboards and 2-foot-long batons. The tall guy in cheap sunglasses stopped in front of Mrs. Mary's house. "You've been warned about planting flowers that don't meet regulations," he said, his voice flat like he was reading from a script. Mrs. Mary trembled, trying to explain, "But I only planted a few tulips. What harm do they do?" The guy didn't respond, just scribbled something on his clipboard, then ripped off a ticket and handed it to her $75 for plants causing aesthetic disruption. I stopped mowing the lawn, standing there, blood boiling in my veins. "What the hell is this?" I muttered, about to step across the street, when Sarah appeared beside me, still holding a wrench, her eyes scanning the group. "Hold on, Mike," she said, her voice low. "Just observe." I turned back to look at her, but she had already stepped into the house, leaving me with a feeling of helplessness. That night, as we had dinner, a simple plate of roasted chicken, I couldn't help but ask, "You saw what happened to Mrs. Mary, right? They punished her over some flowers. What are you going to do about those crazy people?" Sarah took a bite of chicken, then set her fork down. "It's not crazy, Mike. It's power. They're testing how far they can push things." She got up, grabbed her laptop from the basement, and pulled up a video from the camera she had set up near Mrs. Mary's house. The footage appeared. A guy holding a clipboard was speaking into a walkie-talkie, saying, "Voss said to just punish them. No reason needed. Keeping everyone scared is what matters." I sat there, stunned, unable to believe it. "You mean Helen Voss did this on purpose?" Sarah nodded, shutting her laptop. "She's not just some Annie with a clipboard. She's building a little army, no real guns, no real bullets, but enough to make this whole neighborhood shake." I recalled the time Helen knocked on our door, wearing that pale pink sweater and using that overly sweet tone. Looking back now, I realized the coldness in her eyes wasn't just typical annoyance. It was ambition. A few days later, I caught that army of HOA in action again. This time it was Jim, the guy at the end of the street with the vintage Mustang he loves more than his own kids. I was out for my morning jog, around 6 a.m., when I saw 2 guys from the security team standing in front of Jim's garage, one holding a light meter and the other taking notes. "The garage light exceeds 1,000 lumens," the guy with the meter said, sounding all smug. Jim stepped out, wearing an old t-shirt, coffee cup in hand, his face flushed with anger. "Are you kidding me? This is my home, not an airport." The other guy ripped up a $100 ticket and shoved it into Jim's hand. "If you don't comply, we'll take down your garage," he said, then turned away like he'd just won a battle. I ran back and told Sarah. She was sitting at the kitchen table, jotting something down in her notebook. "Are they really using a lumen meter?" she asked, her voice a mix of surprise and excitement. I nodded. "And they're threatening to tear down Jim's garage. Can you believe it?" Sarah looked up, her eyes now sharp as a knife. "Of course I can believe it. They're not just handing out fines anymore. Mike, they're sending a message: comply or lose everything." She stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the quiet street of Willow Creek. They call it a protection squad, but it feels more like a gang in polo shirts. I felt the tension rising within me. But where do they get the right to do that? This is America, not a prison camp. Sarah turned around, her smirk now more pronounced. "Power doesn't need to be legal, Mike. It just needs people to believe it's real. Helen Voss knows that, and so do you." She walked down to the basement, leaving me with her words hanging in the air. Sarah's words. "Power doesn't need to be legal. It just needs people to believe it's real," echoed in my mind for days afterward. I started paying closer attention to what was happening in Willow Creek, and the more I looked, the more I realized that the HOA's imagined army was not just a bunch of people trying to flex their muscles. They were a machine controlled by Helen Voss, and that machine was tightening its grip on this neighborhood little by little. I sat on the porch on a Wednesday evening. The air a cool 60 degrees Fahrenheit, holding a cold can of beer, watching the streetlights cast their glow on the identical houses. But that peace was just a facade now, and I knew Sarah felt it too from the basement, where she continued to build her plans. The next morning, I was jolted awake by a strange engine noise, not the usual sound of cars, but something smaller, buzzing like a lawnmower but at a higher pitch. I stepped outside and spotted a small drone, about 2 feet wide, hovering over Jim's yard a few lots away. 2 guys from a community watch stood nearby, one holding a control panel, while the other scribbled on a clipboard. I rushed over just in time to see Jim burst out of the garage, waving a broom like he was ready to smash the drone. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" he shouted, his face bright red. The guy with the control panel smirked. "Conducting aerial compliance checks. Your yard has a rocking chair that's been outside for over 48 hours. That's a $50 fine." Jim threw the broom down on the ground, shouting so loud that I thought everyone in Fairfax could hear him. "You guys are crazy. This is my home, not your park." The guy ripped up the ticket, shoved it into Jim's hand, and turned away, the drone shooting up in the sky like a predator that just spotted its prey. I stood there, stunned, feeling like I was watching a cheap sci-fi movie. When I told Sarah about it, she wasn't surprised. She just nodded, jotted something down in her notebook, and said, "They're testing the limits, Mike. The drone is the next step." I bet Helen is really proud. The madness doesn't stop. That weekend, I saw 3 guys from patrol team roaming the streets, this time wearing cheap tactical vests bought from Walmart, sporting plastic safety officer badges. One guy was wielding a flashlight the size of a baseball bat, even though it was bright as day at 10 a.m. Another one had a decibel meter, a sound meter, and stopped in front of Mrs. Mary's house. She had just turned on the radio to listen to some classical music. The volume probably didn't even reach 30 decibels. But that guy was still taking notes, writing up a ticket for excessive noise. Mrs. Mary held the ticket, her eyes welling up, but she didn't say a word. I ran back, banging on the basement door. "Sarah, they ticketed Mrs. Mary for listening to her radio. That radio isn't even louder than the birds singing." Sarah stepped up, holding a USB drive from her laptop. "I know," she said, her voice calm but as cold as steel. "They don't need a real reason anymore. They want everyone to be afraid, want everyone to bow down." She opened her laptop, showing me a sound clip from the microphone she had placed near Mrs. Mary's house. Helen Voss's voice crackled through the intercom. "Don't let anyone feel comfortable. Punish as many as you can. They'll give up on their own." I clenched my fists, so angry I wanted to punch the wall. What's wrong with that woman? Who does she think she is? Sarah shrugged. She thinks she's the queen of Willow Creek, but she doesn't realize that crown is about to fall. The tension inside me skyrocketed as I watched the security team becoming more and more brazen. One evening, I saw them standing in front of our house, a guy shining a flashlight straight into the living room window where I was watching TV. I stood up, opened the door, and shouted, "What are you doing?" The guy turned around, his voice flat, checking the light. Your window reflects over 500 lumens, which could distract the neighbors. I nearly laughed at that ridiculous excuse, but then I saw him jotting something down on his clipboard. Fine, $25, he said, tearing off a paper and handing it to me. I snatched it, ready to rip it apart, but Sarah peered behind me, placing her hand on my shoulder. Thank you, she said to the guy in a sickly sweet voice, then pulled me back inside. What are you doing? I asked, feeling frustrated. Sarah shut the door and tossed the ticket onto the table. Let them think they're winning, Mike. Every time they do this, they just dig themselves deeper. She headed down to the basement, and I could hear her typing on the laptop, probably adding a new clip from the hidden camera. I sank down onto the sofa, still gripping the ticket tightly, feeling like the whole neighborhood was being squeezed by the invisible hand of Helen Voss and her polo shirt henchman. But then I remembered Sarah's gaze, not fear, not anger, but the unwavering resolve of someone who had faced down foes far more terrifying than this bunch 100 times over. She wasn't just watching anymore. She was gearing up to fight back. I looked out the window and saw the silhouette guy from the security team fading around the corner, and I knew they weren't just up against us. They were up against Sarah, a former Delta Force operative who never loses. After days of witnessing the HOA's imagined army running rampant throughout Willow Creek, from drones hovering over Jim's yard to decibel meters punishing Mrs. Mary, I felt like the whole neighborhood was suffocating. Sarah, on the other hand, was calm and mysterious, like a storm quietly brewing beneath a surface of tranquility. That night, as I sat on the couch with the ticket for a window light over 500 lumens still in hand, Sarah emerged from the basement, her eyes shining strangely. "The 4th of July is coming up," she said, her voice light but firm. "We're having a barbecue, inviting the whole neighborhood." I frowned. A barbecue? Right now? With that HOA crew out there? She smiled, that sly grin I knew was a sign of a big plan. Exactly. They will come, and I want them to. Independence Day arrived like a summer breeze. The sky in Fairfax was clear, the temperature around 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and the air was filled with the scent of freshly cut grass and charcoal smoke from the grills around the neighborhood. I stood in my backyard, tongs in hand, sweat trickling down my forehead as I placed each rib on the grill. Sarah had transformed the backyard into a perfect scene. A long wooden table covered with red and white checkered tablecloth, a cooler packed with Coors beer and ice-cold Coca-Cola, and a Bluetooth speaker playing Luke Bryan's country music at just the right volume so it wouldn't disturb anyone. Mrs. Mary brought over a tray of homemade cookies. Jim rolled his Mustang out to show off to the kids, and nearly 20 neighbors gathered, chatting and laughing animatedly. From the outside, you'd think it was just an ordinary party, but I knew Sarah never did anything without a purpose. Her Raptor was parked right in front of the house, the matte black paint glimmering in the sunlight, a small American flag planted on a windshield like a silent challenge. I asked her last night, "Aren't you worried they'll ticket you for that car?" Sarah just shrugged. Let them try. Now, as I stood grilling meat, I glanced across the street and saw 3 guys from the Willow Creek Community Watch, dressed in black tactical vests, approaching from the corner like a patrol unit. The lead guy, tall and familiar with his sunglasses, was holding a clipboard. The second guy had a small camera attached to his chest. The third, shorter one, was clutching a walkie-talkie, mumbling something I couldn't quite catch. My heart raced faster. But Sarah, setting a paper plate on the table, merely glanced at them and went back to her task as if nothing was happening. "Mike, add a little salt to the ribs," she called out, her voice calm. I complied, but my eyes were still glued to that group of people. They had stopped in front of the Raptor, about 20 feet from our house. The guy with the clipboard stepped forward, his voice booming as if he were reading a proclamation. "This vehicle violates Section 14.2.5 of the Willow Creek regulations regarding military-style aesthetics that do not align with community standards." Neighbors began to turn and look, the chatter fading away. I felt the atmosphere grow heavier, like before a storm. Sarah set down the plate, slowly walked out of the yard, and stood in front of the Raptor, arms crossed. "What part isn't suitable?" she asked, her tone light but sharp. The spirit of freedom or the power of the engine? The guy in sunglasses smirked, clearly not liking the challenge. "This is your final warning," he said, flipping through his clipboard. "Move your car now, or we will take strong action under the HOA's authority." Jim, standing next to the Mustang, muttered, "What authority?" "These fake cops." I set down the tongs and stepped closer to Sarah, feeling like every eye in the yard was fixed on us. Mrs. Mary, holding a tray of cookies, whispered to the person next to her, "They're causing trouble again." Sarah didn't budge, just stared at the guy, her gaze piercing through his cheap sunglasses. "Go ahead and try," she said, her voice steady but full of power. The guy with the camera moved closer, turning on the red light on the device, zooming in on Sarah and the Raptor. "We're recording defiance," he said, his voice dripping with triumph. He grabbed the radio and muttered, "Subject is uncooperative, requesting instructions." I could hear the murmurs from the crowd of neighbors growing tense. Some stepped back, while a few kids huddled behind their parents. I turned to Sarah and whispered, "What do you plan to let them do next?" She didn't answer, just slightly tilted her head, as if she was waiting. Then it happened. The guy in sunglasses, perhaps irritated by Sarah's calm gaze, reached down to his waistband, where the taser that had shocked her 2 weeks ago still dangled. "You're obstructing the enforcement of regulations," he said, stepping closer, less than 5 feet away from Sarah. "Step aside, or we'll take stronger measures to restore community order." I felt the blood rush to my head, wanting to scream stop. But my throat was dry, the silence was suffocating, with only the sound of country music echoing from the speakers. Sarah stood frozen. She was barely 5 feet 6 inches, but she looked like an unmovable wall of steel. The guy pulled out a taser, raising it with his finger on the trigger. "This is your last chance," he growled. I stepped forward, intending to pull Sarah away, but she raised her hand to stop me, her gaze still locked onto him. "Go ahead, shoot," she said, her voice low but clear, echoing across the yard. "I want to see if you can aim better this time." The guy in sunglasses didn't wait any longer. A sharp zap echoed as a taser shot out, striking Sarah in the chest. She fell to the grass, and screams erupted from the crowd. Mrs. Mary dropped her tray of cookies, and Jim rushed forward, but I held him back. I stood frozen, my hands trembling, watching Sarah lying there motionless. The guy with the taser smirked, turning to the one with the camera. "Get this on tape." She brought it on herself. But then his smile faded. From the bushes beside the house, from the garage roof, from Mrs. Mary's window, red laser dots appeared, not just one, but dozens, dancing across the chest, arms, and next to the 3 guys from the security team. I turned back, my heart pounding. Shadows emerged from the darkness. Jake, tall and cold-eyed, along with 4 others, dressed in dark clothes, no insignias, no sound. They didn't shout, didn't run. They just appeared like phantoms, rifles with laser sights in hand. Sarah's Delta Force team had arrived, and the air in the yard felt heavy as lead. The guy in sunglasses dropped his hands, the taser clattering to the ground, his eyes wide with terror. I looked at Sarah, still lying on the grass, and I knew this wasn't a coincidence. This was her final move. The sound of the taser still echoed in the air as Sarah lay on the grass, the smoke from the grill mingling with the faint scent of gunpowder from the shot. The crowd in my backyard stood frozen, Mrs. Mary covering her face, Jim clenching his fists as if ready to charge, and the kids huddled behind their parents, wide-eyed with fear. I wanted to scream, wanted to rush to Sarah's side, but my legs felt like they were nailed to the ground, my eyes glued to the dancing red laser dots on the chests of the 3 guys from the Willow Creek Community Patrol. The guy in sunglasses, the one who shot Sarah, stood there, trembling, the taser falling to grass with a thud like a confession of failure. Then, from the shadows, Sarah's team emerged. Jake led the way, tall and imposing in his black outfit, his cold, steel-like eyes scanning the crowd. 4 more stepped out from hidden corners, 1 from the garage roof, 2 from the bushes beside the house, and 1 from the second-floor window of Mrs. Mary's house. They didn't shout, nor did they raise their guns in threat. They simply stood there, silent, with red laser beams from their rifles trained directly on the 3 Chinese men. I counted 5 members of Sarah's old Delta Force team, And even though they weren't in military uniforms, the way they moved and controlled the space spoke volumes. They were true warriors. The guy with the camera lowered the equipment, his hands shaking so much that the red light on the device was flashing wildly. He stepped back with the walkie-talkie, muttering, "What the hell is going on?" But the guy in sunglasses, the leader, still tried to maintain his tough demeanor, even though his voice wavered as he shouted, "You have no right to be here. This is private property." He turned to the crowd, as if looking for support, but all he got were looks of shock and fear. I heard Mrs. Mary whisper, "Oh, God, what's happening?" Jim stood next to me, whispering, "Mike, is she okay?" I didn't answer, my eyes still glued to Sarah, my heart pounding in my chest. Then Sarah stirred. She rolled over to one side, propped herself up on the grass, and slowly sat up as if she had just woken from a short nap. The crowd held its breath. A few people gasped in shock. She brushed the dust off her jeans, pulled the taser wire from her t-shirt as if it were just a stray hair, then stood up straight, looking at the guy in sunglasses with a calm, chilling gaze. "You need to practice your aim," she said, her voice steady but ringing clear in the silence. "You still shot low and to the left this time." The guy's mouth dropped open, his hands hanging limply at his sides, sweat pouring down his forehead, trickling over the lenses of his sunglasses. I heard Jim chuckle behind me. "Oh my God! Who is she?" Sarah stepped closer to the guy in sunglasses, less than 3 feet away. Her gaze locked onto him. "You just shot someone who's been hit by tear gas 3 times before breakfast," she said, her voice low but sharp as a knife. "What do you think that toy of yours is going to do to me?" The guy stumbled back, tripping over a taser that had fallen on the grass, nearly falling over. The crowd began to murmur, not out of fear anymore, but out of astonishment, even excitement. I turned to look at Jake and saw him give a slight nod to Sarah, like a silent signal. Her team didn't advance, just stood still, holding their red laser beams like unspoken warnings. "Sarah, are you okay?" I finally spoke up, my voice hoarse as I stepped closer to her. She turned around, giving a small smile that wasn't meant to comfort, but rather the smile of someone who just won a big hand. "You think that thing can take me down a second time, Mike?" she replied, then gently patted my shoulder. "Don't worry, everything is going as it should." Going as it should? I wanted to ask more, but her gaze shifted to the 3 guys from the guard team, and I knew she wasn't finished. The guy in sunglasses, now stripped of all his confidence, stammered, You can't do this." "We have rights." Sarah cut him off. "Your rights stop at not being allowed to attack others," she said, stepping closer. "Do you have any idea how many laws you just broke? Or do you think that cheap suit makes you a real cop?" The guy didn't respond, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. He whispered something into his radio, but there was no reply. Perhaps Helen Voss, the one pulling all the strings, had abandoned them. I looked around and saw the neighbors starting to come closer, no longer afraid. Jim patted me on the shoulder, laughing loudly. "Is your wife a superhero or something, Mike?" Mrs. Mary, her hand still shaking, stepped closer to Sarah and whispered, "Thank you. I had no idea you were this strong." Sarah nodded at her, then turned back to her team. Jake stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over 3 guys like they were a bunch of misbehaving kids. "Do you need us to handle this?" he asked Sarah, his voice deep. She shook her head. "Not yet. Let them figure it out on their own." The guy in sunglasses finally found his voice again, but it was weak, like a whisper in the wind. "You'll regret this," he said, stepping back with the other 2. But as he turned away, I noticed his hand trembling, and the clipboard fell to the ground without him bothering to pick it up. The Delta Force team stood there, the red lasers dancing on their backs as they retreated, disappearing around the corner. The crowd erupted, not with screams, but with hesitant applause that grew louder, as if they had just escaped a nightmare. Sarah stood in the yard, the sunlight shining on her brown hair, and I knew this wasn't just a barbecue. This was a turning point. "You did it!" I whispered, stepping forward to hug her. She smiled softly, but her gaze remained sharp. "Not yet, Mike," she said. "This is just the beginning. The real storm is still coming." I looked at Jake and his crew packing up their gear, then turned back to Sarah. realizing that she wasn't just protecting us, she was changing all of Willow Creek. After the barbecue on July 4th, when Sarah rose from a taser shock like an undefeated warrior and her Delta Force team sent 3 guys from the Community Protection Squad running, the atmosphere in Willow Creek completely shifted. I stood in the backyard, my hands still trembling as I hugged Sarah, listening to the applause from the neighbors ringing out like a wordless chorus. The smoke from the grill still lingered in the Fairfax air, the temperature dropping to around 75 degrees Fahrenheit as the sun set. But the heat in my heart hadn't cooled down yet. Sarah whispered, "This is just beginning," and I knew she was telling the truth. The red laser dots vanished as Jake and his team retreated into the shadows, but the specter of Helen Voss and the HOA still loomed over the neighborhood like a dark cloud. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling, not anxiety, but anticipation. Sarah was up early, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop and a strong cup of black coffee. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her, asking, "What was yesterday all about? What are you planning to do next?" She looked up, her eyes bright yet calm. "Yesterday was a warning, Mike. Today is the final blow." She pushed the laptop toward me, the screen displaying an email that had just been sent titled, "To Agent Thompson, FBI, Washington, D.C." I skimmed through the list of HOA violations, the audio file from the hidden microphone, the video from the security camera, and even the footage of the taser incident from yesterday. "You sent it all?" I asked, my voice trailing off. Sarah nodded. "Jake sent it last night. Now just sit back and watch them implode." I hadn't even had a chance to ask more when the doorbell rang. I stepped out, opened the door, and standing in front of me was a tall man in a black suit, wearing sunglasses, holding a shiny badge. "I'm Agent Thompson, FBI, Civil Enforcement Office," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I need to speak with Ms. Sarah." I turned around and saw Sarah standing behind me, her smirk now more pronounced. "Please come in," she said, leading him into the living room. Thompson sat down and placed a stack of documents on the table. "We received your file last night," he began. "We've been monitoring the Willow Creek HOA since February, but the incident yesterday involving the unauthorized use of a taser on a citizen was enough to launch a formal investigation." I sat next to Sarah, my heart racing. "What do you mean?" I asked. Thompson flipped through the documents, pointing to a page. "This HOA has been operating illegally for a long time. They formed a community watch without a permit, collected over $120,000 in illegal fines in 18 months, and violated civil rights in at least 50 cases. Sarah provided the final evidence we needed." Sarah crossed her arms and nodded. "I'm just documenting what they're doing. They brought this on themselves." Thompson smiled slightly. The first time I'd seen him lighten up. "You've done better than my investigative team in D.C., he said, then stood up. "We'll take action today. You might see a few cars showing up." Just as he said, less than 2 hours later, 3 sleek black SUVs rolled into Willow Creek, silent and without lights, but their presence sent a ripple of excitement through the neighborhood. I stood on the porch, watching as the agents in suits stepped out, papers and radios in hand. They stopped in front of Helen Voss's house, about 200 feet away from us. The door swung open, and Helen emerged in her familiar pale pink sweater, clutching a clipboard like it was her last line of defense. "Who are you? This is private property," she shouted, her voice shrill. Thompson stepped forward, flashing his badge. "Ms. Helen Voss, president of the Willow Creek HOA?" She nodded, her chin held high. "We have a warrant for your arrest for fraud, abuse of power, and running a fake law enforcement group. You need to come with us." Helen laughed loudly, but her laughter quickly faded as 2 agents stepped forward and handcuffed her. "You don't have the right," she shouted, struggling as they led her to the car. The clipboard fell to ground, and the wind blew a few sheets of paper onto the grass. I turned to Sarah, seeing her standing next to me, her gaze calm as she watched the scene unfold. "You did it," I whispered. She patted my shoulder. "It's not over yet, Mike. There are still a few more fish to catch." Sure enough, not long after, 2 guys from the security team, the one in sunglasses who shot the taser and the one with the camera, were dragged out from a house a few blocks away. The guy in sunglasses no longer looked tough. His head was bowed low as he was cuffed, while the other one mumbled something about just following orders. Agent Thompson returned to our house and nodded at Sarah. "We've arrested 3 key players," he said. "Your records show that Helen Voss was running everything, but she hasn't had a valid HOA license since last year. Their entire operation is illegal." I gasped. "You mean all those fines are null and void?" Thompson nodded. "That's right. We'll seize their documents and refund the residents. As for the security team, they're facing charges of impersonating police officers, which could land them in prison for a few years." Sarah stood next to me, hands in her pockets, her tone flat. "Good. They need to learn that power isn't something you can just take." Thompson looked at her, a hint of admiration in his eyes. "You were Delta Force, weren't you?" Sarah chuckled softly. "That was a long time ago. Now I'm just a neighbor." As the SUVs drove away, taking Helen and the 2 goons with them, the air in Willow Creek felt lighter. Neighbors began to gather on the street, whispering to one another, some embracing in joy. Mrs. Mary stepped forward, hugging Sarah, her eyes glistening with tears. "You saved us," she said. Jim patted my shoulder, laughing heartily. "Your wife is a legend, Mike." I looked at Sarah, seeing her gently nodding to everyone, but her gaze remained sharp, as if she knew this wasn't the end just yet. That night, as the sun dipped behind the oak trees, I sat on the porch with Sarah, 2 cold cans of beer in hand. "You did it," I said, clinking my can against hers. She took a sip, gazing out at the now quiet road of Willow Creek. "Not just me, Mike," she replied. "It's all of us. They just needed someone to step up." I nodded, feeling the truth in her words. The HOA had crumbled. No more fines, no more patrols, no more fear. But I knew, for Sarah, this wasn't just a victory, it was the beginning of something much bigger. After the day the black SUVs of the FBI left Willow Creek, taking Helen Voss and 2 of the goons from the community protection team with them, the neighborhood felt like it had shed an invisible weight. I stood on the porch that night, holding a cold can of beer, watching the quiet street that was no longer filled with the sight of guys in black polo shirts or the buzzing of drones overhead. The temperature in Fairfax had dropped to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, a gentle breeze rustling through the oak trees, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and the sense of freedom I hadn't felt since moving here. Sarah sat next to me, silently sipping her beer, her gaze sweeping over the well-lit houses, no longer filled with fear, no longer oppressed. "You did it," I said again, but she just shook her head slightly. "It's us, Mike," she replied, and I knew she was right. Next week, Willow Creek feels like it's been brought back to life. No more tickets plastered on doors, no one measuring grass or shining flashlights into other people's yards. Agent Thompson called to announce that the HOA has officially been dissolved. Their license expired 16 months ago. All fines are null and void, and over $120,000 in illegal fines will be refunded to the residents. Mrs. Mary came to our house, bringing a tray of fresh cookies, hugging Sarah once more with tear-filled eyes. "I don't know how to thank you enough," she said. Jim rolled the Mustang out onto the street, popping the hood to show off the whole neighborhood without fear of being fined for 2 bright garage lights. I watched them, feeling a simple joy spreading in my heart. But I also knew that this happy ending didn't just happen. It was a result of Sarah's hard work, the patience and strategy she brought from Fort Bragg to here. But the story doesn't end there. One Tuesday evening, while Sarah and I were having dinner beef stew and mashed potatoes, Jim knocked on the door, his face flushed with excitement. "There's an emergency community meeting tonight," he said. "People want to form a new council, and they're talking about Sarah." I turned to her, frowning. "Did you hear that? What do they want from you?" Sarah set her fork down, smiling softly. "I guess they want someone who won't just stand there with a clipboard to punish others." I laughed, but deep down I knew that if anyone deserved to lead Willow Creek, it was her. The meeting took place at the community center, a small room with old wooden floors and about 50 plastic chairs arranged in rows. As we walked in, nearly 40 people were already there. Mrs. Mary sat in the front row. Jim was in the corner of the room, and there were other faces I only recognized from a few nods of greeting along the way. The atmosphere was completely different from previous HOA meetings gone with the hammering sound of Helen Voss or her commanding tone. Instead, there was a sense of anticipation, as if everyone was waiting for something monumental. I sat next to Sarah in the back row, feeling the weight of their gazes directed at her. Jim stood up, raising his hand like an amateur MC. "Listen up, everyone," he began, his voice ringing out. "The old HOA is done for, thanks to Sarah. But we need someone to lead us, so we don't fall into that chaos again. I nominate Sarah as the new president." The applause erupted without hesitation, without doubt. Mrs. Mary stood up, her voice trembling. "I agree. She saved this neighborhood." I looked at Sarah. Waiting for her to decline, she wasn't the type to seek the spotlight, but she simply crossed her arms and nodded slightly. "All right," she said, her tone steady. "If that's what everyone wants." The emotions in the room surged as Sarah stepped forward. She didn't bring any paperwork, no clipboard, just standing there with the calm demeanor I had come to know since our wedding day. "I don't like pointless rules," she began, her voice clear and resonant throughout the room. "Willow Creek doesn't need anyone measuring grass or fining us for having our lights on. We live here to be neighbors, not prisoners." The applause erupted again, louder this time, and I saw Jim's eyes light up with pride. Sarah raised her hand, signaling for everyone to quiet down. "The first thing I'm going to do is wipe out the old regulations. No more fines, no more patrols. If you want to do something in your own yard, go ahead. Just don't burn down your neighbor's house." The crowd laughed heartily, the atmosphere lighter than ever. Sarah continued, "The second thing, I'm putting in a new rule. The council has no right to punish anyone, and no one is allowed to wear a suit to intimidate others. We will rely on respect and honesty. If we can't do that, then there's no need for a council at all." I sat there, feeling the power in every word she spoke, not a power that imposes, but a guidance born from trust. When she finished, everyone stood up and applauded, some shouting, "Sarah, Sarah." I looked at her, feeling my heart warm not just because she is my wife, but because she is the one who has changed everything. The meeting wrapped up, and everyone spilled outside, hugging and chatting excitedly. Sarah walked up to me, handed me the small hammer left by the old council. "Hold on to this," she whispered, "but don't use it to hit anyone." I laughed out loud, pulling her into a hug under the dim lights of the community center. As we stepped outside, it was completely dark, the stars twinkling in the Fairfax sky, and Willow Creek now looked like a real neighborhood, no longer haunted by Helen Voss or the days of fear. A few days later, Sarah and I sat on the porch, watching the kids ride their bikes down the street, no one punishing them for drawing with chalk on the sidewalk anymore. She turned to me, her voice warm. "It's not revenge, Mike. It's rebuilding." I nodded, realizing that she hadn't just defeated the HOA. She had rebuilt a community from its ashes. "Oh, and by the way," she added, her eyes sparkling with mischief, "if anyone sees a clipboard that says Protection Squad, just toss it in the nearest fireplace." I laughed, the sound echoing in the peaceful air. Willow Creek is now a home not just for me and Sarah, but for everyone who has ever felt trapped. Sarah's not just a hero of the neighborhood. She is a guiding light, patient and unyielding. And as I watch her sitting there, a beer can in hand, her gaze fixed on the future, I know that she hasn't just won a battle, she has given us all a new life. So we just journeyed through the emotional saga of Sarah and Willow Creek, from the suffocating days under HOA to the triumphant victory of freedom. Thank you for joining us on the Legendary Narratives channel to explore this story, a testament that patience and unity can change everything. We hope you find inspiration in Sarah, and how she stood up not just for herself, but for the entire community. If you loved the story, please leave a like, subscribe to the Legendary Narratives channel, and hit the bell so you won't miss our next amazing journeys. You are our greatest motivation. Goodbye and heartfelt thanks, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay tough, stay proud, and see you soon